Hey everyone, tonight we're diving deep into the murky waters of Australian folklore, down where the river red gums dip their ancient roots and the night air hangs heavy with the scent of eucalyptus and damp earth. We're going in search of a legend, a whisper, a creature that has haunted the billabongs and swamps of the land down under for millennia, the Bunyip. Picture yourself, if you will, not in your comfortable bed, but crouched by the edge of a still, inky black pool of water, somewhere in the vast, untamed Australian interior, maybe a century or two ago. The silence isn't really silent, is it? It's filled with the chirr of insects you don't recognize, the distant, mournful cry of a night bird, and the almost imperceptible rustle of something in the reeds just beyond your vision. Your modern sensibilities, your phone with its handy flashlight, your GPS, they're all gone. You've just got your wits, and frankly, if you were an early European settler plopped down here without a guide, you probably wouldn't survive the week, let alone an encounter with the unknown. The local indigenous people, however, they knew this land. They understood its spirits, its dangers, and its mysteries. So, before you get too comfortable, nestled in your blankets, take a quick moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps more than you know. And as always, I'd love to see where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Drop a comment below. It's always fascinating to see our little community of night owls. Now, turn down the lights, maybe get that fan going for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You're there by that billabong. The moon is a sliver, offering little comfort, casting long, dancing shadows from the gnarled branches of the melaleuca trees. The air is surprisingly cool after the day's blistering heat, but it carries a certain weight, a watchfulness. You can almost taste the age of this place, a land that has dreamt for longer than human memory can recall. You draw your thin, worn coat a little tighter. This isn't the manicured park pond you might be used to. This is a living, breathing, and sometimes a rather unsettling entity. The indigenous peoples of Australia, with a culture stretching back tens of thousands of years, a truly mind-boggling span of time when you really think about it, making ancient Egypt look like recent news. They were the first to speak of the Bunyip. This is our first solid anchor in this watery tale. The Bunyip isn't some recent invention, no cryptid born of grainy photos and internet forums. Its origins are woven into the very fabric of the Dreamtime, the foundational collection of stories and beliefs that explain the creation of the world, the laws of nature, and the social order for many Aboriginal groups. These weren't just spooky campfire tales to scare the children. Dreamtime stories are intricate narratives carrying vital information about survival, geography, resource management, and spiritual understanding. So, when they spoke of a creature inhabiting these waterholes, a creature to be respected, perhaps even feared, it carried immense cultural weight. You try to picture it, based on the fragments of stories that have drifted down through time, passed from indigenous storytellers to curious and often dismissive early European ears. The descriptions are, well, they're a bit all over the place, aren't they? Some say it has a dog-like face, dark fur, and a horse-like tail. Others speak of tusks, or a crocodile head, or even flippers like a seal. One account from the 19th century, reported by a colonist, described it as having a head and neck like an emu, with a long, shaggy black mane, and a body that was, well, they didn't quite see the body, just the unsettling head and neck gliding through the water. This is a classic weird detail, isn't it? The sheer variety of alleged bunyip forms. It's almost as if the creature is a shapeshifter, or perhaps different regions and different storytellers emphasized different aspects, or maybe even described entirely different, localized water spirits under the same umbrella term. It's a bit like everyone agreeing there's something scary in the water, but no one can quite agree on its driver's license photo. Historians still debate whether the Bunyip was purely a symbolic entity, a metaphor for the dangers of waterholes. Think sudden drop-offs, submerged logs, or even actual dangerous animals like crocodiles in the north. Or if the stories were perhaps a kind of folk memory. This is where things get particularly fascinating. Could these tales be echoes of encounters with now extinct Australian megafauna? Imagine early Aboriginal people coexisting with giant marsupials like the Diprotodon, a sort of wombat the size of a rhinoceros, or the Procoptodon, a giant short-faced kangaroo. Some of these creatures were certainly semi-aquatic or frequented water sources. Could the Bunyip be a highly distorted, mythologized memory of these incredible beasts, passed down through countless generations, the details morphing with each telling until only the eerie essence remained? It's a tantalizing thought, linking a mythical creature to a very real, very extinct part of Australia's unique biological heritage. It's a theory some paleontologists find intriguing, while many folklorists lean more towards the symbolic interpretations. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere complexly in between, or perhaps it's just out there having a quiet paddle. You shift your weight, a twig snaps under your boot, and the sound is like a gunshot in the stillness. Your heart thumps. Every ripple on the water's surface now seems deliberate, every shadowed log a potential submerged beast. The European settlers who began arriving in Australia in the late 18th and 19th centuries brought their own set of beliefs and, let's be honest, a healthy dose of fear of the unknown. This vast ancient continent was so alien to them, so different from the tamed landscapes of Europe. And when they started hearing these persistent indigenous stories about a dangerous water spirit, the Bunyip quickly entered colonial folklore too, often with a more monstrous, less nuanced connotation. It became the Australian goblin, a bogeyman of the billabongs. Think about those early colonists. They're trying to establish farms, build settlements, often in places that were, from an indigenous perspective, sacred or significant in ways the newcomers couldn't comprehend. They'd hear a strange booming or moaning sound from a nearby swamp at night, a sound they couldn't identify. Perhaps their livestock would go missing near a waterhole. What's the easiest explanation when you're in a strange, intimidating land? Already on edge? The Bunyip, of course. It's the perfect scapegoat, the perfect embodiment of all that is wild and untamable about this new world. There's a famous account from the 1840s regarding the Geelong Bunyip. A peculiar skull was found, and for a while it was paraded around as potential Bunyip evidence, sparking immense public curiosity and even scientific interest. Newspapers ran sensational stories. It was, for a moment, Australia's Bigfoot moment. Eventually, the skull was identified, rather anticlimactically, by a naturalist in Sydney as likely being a deformed calf or foal fetus. Not quite as exciting as a bona fide monster, is it? It's like finding out the scary monster under your bed is just a pile of laundry you forgot to put away. A bit embarrassing for everyone who got worked up. The sounds you're hearing now as you sit by this imaginary billabong, could they be part of this puzzle? That deep, resonant boom boom that seems to vibrate through the ground? Could it be the call of the Australasian bittern? This reclusive bird, also known as the Bunyip bird in some areas, makes an incredibly deep, booming call that can travel long distances, especially at night. It's an eerie, almost mournful sound, and if you weren't expecting it or didn't know its source, it could easily be attributed to something much larger and more mysterious lurking in the depths. This is a key historical fact often brought up in Bunyip discussions. Many so-called Bunyip calls have plausible explanations in the known native fauna. Seals, too, have been known to travel far up river systems in Australia, and their barks and moans, heard out of context, could certainly spook someone unfamiliar with them. But then there are the other accounts, the ones that are harder to explain away. The sheer persistence of the belief across so many different indigenous language groups, often in regions geographically isolated from one another, suggests something more profound than just a misidentified bird or a lost seal. Each group had its own name for the creature, or similar water spirits, but the core concept of a powerful, often dangerous, being inhabiting these water sources was remarkably consistent. This points to a deep-seated cultural understanding, perhaps an amalgamation of observations, warnings, and spiritual beliefs that served a vital purpose in communities living in close proximity to these life-giving, but also perilous environments. You trail your fingers in the cool water at the billabong's edge, then quickly withdraw them. It feels a little too much like dipping your toes into the unknown. What if the Bunyip wasn't necessarily aggressive? What if, as our title for tonight suggests, it was simply sleepy or misunderstood? Many Aboriginal stories, while cautioning respect and avoidance, don't always paint the Bunyip as an actively malevolent entity. Sometimes it's more of a guardian of the waterhole, a spirit that demands certain protocols be followed. Disturb its home, take too much water, or disrespect the place, and then you might have a problem. But leave it in peace, approach with respect, and perhaps it would leave you in peace too. Maybe its roars and splashes were less about territorial aggression and more like a grumpy old man yelling at kids to get off his lawn, or in this case, out of his private, very comfortable billabong. Stop splashing, you're waking me up, it might gurgle. The European perspective, however, often lacked this nuance. For many settlers, anything that couldn't be immediately classified, controlled, or exploited was often deemed monstrous or a nuisance. There wasn't always an inclination to understand the indigenous spiritual connection to the land and its denizens, both seen and unseen. So, a creature that was, in its original context, a complex figure of respect, warning, and perhaps even a kind of ecological guardian, could easily become simplified into a mere monster in the colonial imagination. Historians still debate the extent to which colonial accounts of the Bunyip accurately reflected indigenous beliefs versus how much they were shaped by European fears, preconceptions, and the desire for sensational tales from a strange new land. It's a tangled web of cross-cultural interpretation and misinterpretation, where the original meanings can become as murky as the Billabong water itself. Think about the Bunyip Hole near the Murray River, a place where in 1847, indigenous guides refused to go, stating a bunyip lived there. Or the stories of bunyips dragging prey or even people down into the depths. These are certainly frightening, but then consider the sheer number of people who have lived near Australian waterways for millennia. If bunyips were constantly aggressive and actively hunting humans, wouldn't the stories be even more universally terrifying? And wouldn't there be more, shall we say, evidence in the colonial period beyond strange sounds and fleeting glimpses? Perhaps the truly dangerous encounters were rare, the result of specific transgressions or unfortunate accidents magnified in the telling. One particularly weird detail from the annals of bunyipology is the occasional association of the creature with a powerful putrid smell. Some accounts mention an overwhelming stench preceding a bunyip appearance or a strange disturbance in the water. Now, swamps and stagnant water can certainly produce unpleasant odors from decaying vegetation and anaerobic bacteria. But a smell so distinct and overwhelming that it becomes a herald of the creature? That adds another layer of sensory mystery. It's not just what you see or hear, it's what you smell. Imagine that, sitting by your billabong and suddenly the air, already thick with the scent of mud and gum leaves, becomes cloyingly foul, a warning from your most primal sense that something is very wrong, or at least very much present. It's enough to make you want to hold your breath and hope it just paddles on by. Maybe the bunyip just really needed a bath and was a bit sensitive about anyone pointing it out. Yes, I know, the mud bath didn't quite wash off. Thank you for noticing. It might grumble from the reeds. As the night deepens around you, the stars in the southern hemisphere blaze with an intensity rarely seen in light-polluted modern skies. You can make out the dark patches of the Coalsack Nebula next to the Southern Cross, which, by the way, Aboriginal astronomers had identified and woven into their star maps and stories millennia before Europeans ever discovered it. This land is ancient, its knowledge profound, and the Bunyip is but one thread in this vast, intricate tapestry. The early European attempts to capture or kill a Bunyip, often spurred by bounties or the desire for fame, seem almost comical in retrospect, given the creature's elusive nature and the settlers' profound lack of understanding of what they were even looking for. It's like trying to catch the wind in a net. There were expeditions, armed men staking out waterholes, all very serious and determined. And what did they find? Usually nothing but frustration, more strange noises, and perhaps a deeper, grudging respect for the mysteries of the Australian bush. The whole idea of the Bunyip being misunderstood resonates, doesn't it? In a world that increasingly seeks to categorize, explain, and demystify everything, the Bunyip remains stubbornly enigmatic. It resists easy definition, and perhaps that's its true power, its enduring legacy. It represents the unknowable, the parts of the natural world that still hold their secrets close. To the Aboriginal people, it was a known part of their world, understood within their framework of reality. For the colonists, it was a symbol of the terrifying otherness of the Australian landscape. For us tonight, perhaps it's an invitation to consider that not everything needs to be dissected and labeled. Some mysteries are more potent, more beautiful even, when left to dwell in the shadowy places, in the quiet corners of our imagination, and of course in the still, dark waters of a lonely billabong. You begin to feel a sort of calm settling over you, there by the water's edge. The initial prickle of fear has softened into a deep curiosity, a sense of being a small part of something vast and ancient. The sounds of the night are no longer alien threats, but a symphony of the Australian nocturnal world. A world where, just perhaps, a very tired, very private creature is trying to get some sleep, occasionally letting out a sigh or a grumble that echoes across the water like a deep, booming drum. Maybe all the fuss, all the stories, all the fear is just because humans are by nature a bit noisy and prone to jumping to conclusions, especially when faced with something they don't immediately understand. The bunyip in its watery home might just be the ultimate introvert, wishing everyone would just keep the noise down after sunset. Honestly, you can almost hear it muttering as it resettles its large, undefined form in the comfy mud. Can a mythical being get a decent night's rest around here without someone writing a sensationalist newspaper article about it? You let out a slow breath, the kind that doesn't quite fog in this mild night air, but feels like it carries a little of your own modern tension away with it, letting it dissipate among the paper barks and river red gums. The billabong remains a dark mirror reflecting those impossibly distant stars, and somewhere within its depths, or perhaps just within the stories that cling to its edges like morning mist, the bunyip still resides. We've touched on its ancient indigenous roots, its often confused colonial interpretations, but now let's wade a little deeper into the specifics, into the accounts that tried to pin this elusive creature down, like trying to catch smoke with a butterfly net. The 19th century was prime time for bunyip mania, especially in the rapidly expanding colonial settlements of southeastern Australia. Newspapers, those glorious bastions of print and occasional wild speculation, played a huge role in fanning the flames. This is a key historical tidbit. The rise of the penny press and a literate public eager for news, any news, from the strange and untamed parts of the colony, meant that any whisper of a bunyip sighting could become front-page material. A farmer in rural Victoria hears a strange noise. Bunyip. A shepherd finds some unusually large, unidentifiable tracks near a waterhole. Must be the bunyip. It's the 1800s equivalent of a viral tweet, really, just with more ink and a much slower refresh rate. These stories weren't just reported, they were embellished, debated, and often met with a mixture of fear and thrilling excitement. It was entertainment as much as it was news. You can almost picture yourself in a dusty, lamplit newspaper office in Melbourne or Sydney. The editor, a man with ink-stained fingers and probably a permanently furrowed brow from trying to fill column inches, and gets a letter from some far-flung correspondent detailing a terrifying nocturnal encounter by a swamp. "By Jove, Jenkins," he might exclaim to his long-suffering assistant, "this bunyip business sells papers. Get a woodcut artist on it immediately. Make it look menacing. But not too menacing. We don't want to cause a panic." Or do we? A little panic is good for circulation. And so the legend grew, one exaggerated headline at a time. Consider the account from the Australian and New Zealand Gazette in 1847, which reported on the discovery of an extraordinary animal that had supposedly been shot in the Murrumbidgee River. The description was, as usual, rather vague. Larger than a Newfoundland dog with a head and neck like those of a horse and a long, flowing mane. It even mentioned the creature uttering a frightful cry. Of course, no actual carcass was ever properly examined by scientists, and the story just sort of faded like so many others. But for a week or two, it would have been the talk of the town. This is one of those wonderfully weird marginal details, the sheer number of almost captures. The bunyip was always just out of reach, the evidence always tantalizingly incomplete. There's another story from around the same period of a Bunyip skull found near the Murray River, which caused a similar stir before it, too, was eventually identified as something far more mundane. I believe it was the skull of a particularly unfortunate malformed horse. It seems malformed livestock fetus was a common, if somewhat disappointing, explanation for many a bunyip head. This proliferation of often contradictory and unverifiable accounts leads to an interesting academic debate. To what extent did this colonial press sensationalism begin to influence or even overwrite the original indigenous narratives? As European settlers became more dominant, their understanding or misunderstanding of the Bunyip started to permeate the wider consciousness. Historians and anthropologists still discuss whether indigenous informants, when speaking to Europeans, might have sometimes tailored their stories to fit the expectations of their interviewers, perhaps emphasizing the more monstrous or frightening aspects because that's what the white fellas seemed interested in. Or conversely, perhaps they withheld deeper, more sacred knowledge about these beings, offering only surface level descriptions. It's a complex interplay of cultures, power dynamics, and the inherent difficulties of translating deep spiritual concepts from one worldview to another, especially when one of those worldviews is actively trying to make a quick buck selling newspapers. You lean back against the rough bark of a eucalyptus, its distinctive scent a grounding presence in the night. The air is still, the only real movement the slow drift of the stars overhead, and the occasional ripple spreading across the billabong's surface from an unseen source. Was that the wind? A fish jumping? Or something else? Something that prefers not to break the surface entirely? Let's think about the sounds again, the bunyip's supposed voice. We mentioned the Australasian bittern, its booming call a prime candidate for many auditory encounters. But other creatures could have contributed to the chorus of the unknown. The nocturnal bellow of a male koala, for instance, is surprisingly deep and guttural, almost pig-like or demonic if you're not expecting it. It's a sound that can carry a fair distance and is utterly at odds with their cuddly, sleepy image. You can imagine a settler alone in his hut hearing that for the first time. He's probably thinking, that's no bear, that's the devil's own lapdog gargling. It's a good reminder that the Australian bush had, and still has, a unique and often startling soundtrack, especially for unaccustomed ears. Then there are the seals. Yes, seals. While most people associate them with the coastlines, some species, like the Australian fur seal, have been known to travel remarkably far up freshwater river systems, hundreds of kilometers inland. Their barks, growls, and moans, echoing strangely over freshwater swamps or wide river bends, could easily be mistaken for something else. There's a well-documented historical fact. In the early days of settlement around Lake Tiberias in Tasmania, now known as Lake Sorell, the strange cries heard at night, attributed by local Aboriginal people to a bunyip or similar creature, were eventually found to be those of southern elephant seals that had made their way into the lake system. It's a classic case of a known animal in an unexpected place creating a monster. But the question remains, did these explainable sounds account for all bunyip calls? Some indigenous descriptions speak of a roar that was far more powerful, or a cry that was distinctly different from known animal calls. This is where the misunderstood part of our bunyip really comes into play. Perhaps the bunyip wasn't just one sound, but a whole symphony of them, a label applied to any strange, unidentified noise emanating from these mysterious water bodies. And maybe, just maybe, some of those sounds were indeed unique, belonging to something that has since vanished, or something that remains exceptionally good at hide and seek. It's like that one car alarm in your neighborhood that has a weird, unique squawk you can't quite place. Irritating, yes, but also undeniably distinct. The bunyip's call might have been the ancient, irritating but distinct car alarm of the billabong. Let's consider the cultural significance of the bunyip beyond just being a thing that goes bump in the night. For many Aboriginal groups, the bunyip, or its regional equivalent, wasn't simply a monster to be feared. It was often a powerful spiritual being, a guardian of the waterhole, and its presence was a vital part of the local ecosystem's spiritual health. These water sources were and are life. They were oases in a dry land, places of abundance, but also places of potential danger. The stories about the Bunyip often served as cautionary tales, reinforcing respect for these critical resources. Don't go swimming alone, especially at dusk. Don't take too many fish or foul the water. Show respect when you approach. These weren't just arbitrary rules, they were often practical ecological wisdom couched in a spiritual narrative. Breaking these rules wasn't just socially unacceptable, it could anger the guardian of the place, the Bunyip, leading to dire consequences. This is a crucial historical fact. These stories were often sophisticated tools for resource management and social cohesion. There's a weird detail in some traditions about offerings or specific behaviors required to appease or avoid provoking such water spirits. While not always explicitly documented for the Bunyip by that specific name across all groups, the general idea of placating local land and water spirits was common. This might involve not speaking loudly near certain water holes, or leaving a portion of a catch, or even more symbolic gestures. Imagine an elder quietly instructing a younger person on the correct way to approach a billabong, known to be a Bunyip's haunt, a ritual of respect passed down through generations, ensuring both safety and the continued purity of the water. It's a far cry from the colonial image of terrified natives cowering from a bloodthirsty monster. This leads to another ongoing academic debate. Were all the creatures labeled Bunyip by Europeans actually the same entity in the diverse indigenous cosmologies? Australia is a vast continent, home to hundreds of distinct Aboriginal language groups and cultures. While there were shared themes and figures across cultural blocks, there was also immense regional variation. It's highly probable that the term Bunyip, which originates from a southeastern Aboriginal language, likely Wemba Wemba or Wergaya, became a sort of convenient, if overly simplistic, catch-all term used by colonists to describe a wide array of different water spirits, each with its own unique characteristics, stories, and cultural significance in its specific region. Scholars are still working to untangle these distinct traditions from the generalized Bunyip myth, trying to understand the specific local meanings that might have been lost or obscured by the homogenizing effect of colonial storytelling. It's like a zoologist trying to explain that not all big cats are tigers. There are lions, jaguars, leopards, each distinct, even if they share some family resemblances. The Bunyip might have been the big cat label for a whole family of fascinating, distinct water spirits. You shift again, the sounds of your own movement seeming to hush the night for a moment, before its subtle chorus resumes. What if the Bunyip's grumpiness, its supposed desire to drag people into the murky depths, was less about malice and more about, well, wanting some peace and quiet? Think about it. Billabongs are often tranquil places, especially at dawn and dusk. Imagine you're a large, reclusive, possibly nocturnal or crepuscular creature, and your prime napping spot, your sanctuary, is suddenly overrun with noisy newcomers who splash, shout, and generally disrupt your centuries-long siesta. You'd probably get a bit testy. For goodness sake, the Bunyip might sigh, a sound like air escaping a giant, muddy bellows. Can't a primordial being get some uninterrupted shut-eye? The kookaburras are bad enough at dawn, but this is a new level of disturbance. This sleepy Bunyip hypothesis is, of course, mostly playful speculation on our part, a way to inject a little gentle humor into the mystery. But it does touch upon that idea of misunderstanding. What if the Bunyip's roars were yawns? What if the thrashing in the water was just it turning over in its sleep, trying to get comfortable in its muddy bed? What if the victims it supposedly dragged under were simply people who unfortunately stumbled into its resting place, startling it awake? A surprised, half-asleep Bunyip might react defensively, not aggressively. It's the difference between a deliberate attack and accidentally stepping on someone's foot in a dark, crowded room. Both can cause harm, but the intent is worlds apart. The desire to see, to capture, to know the Bunyip in a tangible Western scientific sense was strong in the colonial era. Besides newspaper reports, there were actual expeditions, albeit usually small-scale and ill-fated. Men would arm themselves and venture into swamps, determined to bring back a specimen, dead or alive. One humorous, if apocryphal, image is of a group of very serious Victorian gentlemen, complete with mutton chop whiskers and heavy woolen suits, sweating profusely in the Australian heat, peering into a murky swamp with butterfly nets and elephant guns, expecting a monster from a medieval bestiary to emerge. They were probably more of a danger to themselves and the local mosquito population than to any actual bunyip. It's the classic clash of expectations and reality. They were looking for a dragon, and the bush offered them subtle rustlings, strange echoes, and a profound sense of being watched by something they couldn't quite grasp. This brings us to the power of the mind, the psychology of belief in such a creature. In a new, often hostile environment, the human mind is adept at filling in the blanks, often with its worst fears. The Australian landscape, so different from Europe, with its unique flora and fauna, its vast distances, and its often unforgiving nature, could easily breed a sense of unease, a feeling that anything could be out there. The bunyip, in this context, becomes more than just a potential physical creature. It becomes a psychological projection, an embodiment of the anxieties and uncertainties of colonial life. It's the fear of the dark writ large on a continental scale. Historians still debate the psychological impact of the Australian environment on the early colonists and how this might have fueled belief in creatures like the bunyip. It's a reminder that our perception of reality is often shaped as much by our internal landscape as by the external world. And yet, to dismiss the bunyip entirely as a product of colonial anxiety or misidentified known animals would be to ignore the depth and persistence of the indigenous traditions that predate European arrival by tens of thousands of years. These weren't people new to the land, easily spooked by unfamiliar sounds. They had an intimate, profound knowledge of their environment. If they spoke of powerful beings in the water, it was based on generations of experience, observation, and cultural understanding. Perhaps the truth of the bunyip lies in a space that accommodates both, a core of ancient indigenous knowledge and belief, layered over with colonial interpretations, misidentifications, and the enduring human fascination with the unknown. Imagine for a moment that you do see something. Not a clear view, never a clear view, but a dark shape, a little too large, moving with a little too much purpose just beneath the surface. A swirl of muddy water where moments before there was stillness. A sudden, heavy sighing sound from the reeds that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. Is it your imagination, primed by an evening of stories? Is it a log, a shadow, a trick of the faint moonlight on the water? Or is it a fleeting glimpse of something else, something ancient and wary, something that knows you're there and prefers to remain unseen, unheard, undisturbed in its watery, timeless slumber? The ambiguity is part of its power, its enduring charm. It's like that one last piece of chocolate you think is in the box, but you're not sure. The anticipation and uncertainty are almost as good as the chocolate itself. Or in this case, perhaps far less terrifying. The night wears on. The Southern Cross has wheeled further across the sky. The air is growing cooler, carrying the promise of dawn, though it's still hours away. Your journey into the world of the bunyip is far from over. We've peeled back some layers, looked at the stories, the sounds, the evidence, but the creature itself remains tantalizingly out of focus. A ripple in the dark water, a whisper in the rustling reeds, a sleepy grumble from the heart of the ancient Australian continent. The first faint hints of gray are beginning to touch the eastern sky, a subtle dilution of the deep indigo that has held you company through these long hours by the billabong. The stars, though still brilliant, seem to be drawing a little further away, preparing for the sun's inevitable return. Your journey with the bunyip, too, is drawing towards a different kind of dawn, a shift in how this enigmatic creature resides in the collective imagination. As the landscape of Australia was gradually and often forcibly tamed and charted by European settlers through the latter half of the 19th and into the 20th century, the spaces for a creature like the bunyip to physically exist began to shrink, at least in the popular European mindset. Swamps were drained for agriculture, rivers were dammed, and the relentless march of scientific inquiry sought to categorize every living thing. This is a significant historical development. The rise of more formal zoological studies and systematic biological surveys in Australia. Expeditions were launched not just for geographical discovery, but specifically to document the continent's unique fauna. Naturalists like Gerard Krefft in the mid-19th century, or later Baldwin Spencer and Frank Gillen, meticulously cataloged animals, insects, and marine life. As more and more of Australia's distinctive animals and their calls became known and documented, the strange hoot of a powerful owl, the eerie cry of a bushstone curlew, the aforementioned booming of the bittern, or the grunts of the koala, many of the mysterious sounds once attributed to the bunyip found their mundane, though still fascinating, zoological explanations. It became harder to imagine a large, unknown animal lurking in a well-surveyed waterhole when science was busy cataloging every tadpole and water beetle. The bunyip, in a sense, was being scientifically evicted from its more plausible hiding spots. You can almost imagine a scene. A dedicated, slightly eccentric naturalist, armed with a specimen jar and a notebook, patiently sitting by a billabong. He hears a terrifying roar. Instead of fleeing, he adjusts his spectacles, consults his notes, and mutters, "Ah, yes, Batarus poicoloptilus. Call pattern consistent with a male seeking a mate. Not a bunyip, merely a very amorous bittern. Case closed." It takes some Ovika the spooky fun out of it, doesn't it? But it also speaks to that human drive to understand, to label, and perhaps to control the world around us. Of course, this didn't mean Bunyip stories vanished overnight. They simply shifted. One rather weird detail from this transitional period is the occasional, almost desperate attempt to prove the Bunyip's existence using increasingly modern methods, or the rapid debunking that often followed. Picture, if you will, someone in the early 20th century trying to set up a rudimentary camera trap, hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature only to capture a blurry image of a wallaby having a late-night drink. Or perhaps a particularly large, shaggy dog that had wandered off from a nearby farm. There were still alleged sightings, of course, but they were often met with more skepticism, more readily available alternative explanations. The newspapers, while perhaps still enjoying a bit of local color, were less likely to trumpet a Bunyip sighting as definitive proof of a monster. The narrative was changing. It's like when your favorite mystery show finally reveals the killer, and it's the boring accountant all along. A bit of a letdown, but you can't argue with the evidence trail. This shift in perception leads to a continuing discussion among sociologists and cultural historians. Has the decline in literal belief in a physical bunyip meant a true disenchantment of the Australian landscape? Or has the archetype of the bunyip simply shapeshifted again, transforming from a tangible creature of the waterholes into something more symbolic? Some argue that the anxieties and mysteries the bunyip once represented haven't disappeared. They've just found new outlets, perhaps in environmental concerns about endangered species and vanishing habitats, the bunyip as a symbol of what we've lost, or in a more romanticized touristic view of the mysterious outback, where the idea of the bunyip adds a certain thrilling flavor, even if no one seriously expects to encounter one. The bunyip might have traded its murky billabong for a comfortable spot on a souvenir tea towel, a slightly less intimidating but far more marketable existence. You stretch, feeling the coolness of the pre-dawn air seep into your bones. The billabong is calm, almost glass-like now, reflecting the paling sky. The world feels suspended, holding its breath before the day begins. And what of the bunyip in our truly modern times? It certainly hasn't vanished from Australian culture. It features in children's books and artwork as a mascot for sports teams, the Murray Bridge Bunyips, for example. And occasionally, it still gets a nod in a documentary about Australian folklore or cryptozoology. It has become a familiar, if still somewhat enigmatic, part of the Australian cultural menagerie. For many Indigenous Australians, of course, the stories and the significance of water spirits connected to their ancestral lands continue, often independent of the more sensationalized colonial or modern interpretations. Their bunyip, or its local equivalent, was never just a monster. It was and is part of a living culture and a deep spiritual connection to country. The cryptozoology angle is interesting, isn't it? There are still those who search for evidence of unknown animals in Australia, megafauna survivors, or other creatures that have eluded scientific classification. While the classic 19th century image of the bunyip isn't usually the primary target, the spirit of seeking the unknown persists. mainstream science remains, quite rightly, skeptical, demanding rigorous evidence. But the allure of what if is powerful. You can imagine a dedicated amateur cryptozoologist, perhaps with slightly more sophisticated gear than our Victorian gentlemen, thermal cameras, sonar detectors, spending their weekends exploring remote waterways, driven by that same human curiosity that fueled the original Bunyip tales. They said the thylacine was extinct for decades before that last one died in captivity. They might argue. Who's to say what else is out there really good at hiding? It's a romantic notion, the idea of these hidden wonders, and the Bunyip is a kind of elder statesman in that particular club of elusive cryptids. This leads to a more lighthearted academic ponderance. If the Bunyip were real and had managed to survive into the 21st century, what would its main concerns be? Probably not spears and muskets anymore. More likely, it'd be habitat loss, water pollution from agricultural runoff, and the general noise and disruption of modern life. The truly terrifying prospect for a reclusive, sleepy Bunyip might be a real estate developer eyeing its billabong for a new waterfront housing estate. The horror, it would gurgle. Those jet skis are going to be murder on my afternoon nap, and the property taxes are simply unconscionable for a being of my traditional standing. Or perhaps it would try to list its billabong on some sort of monster BMB. Quiet, secluded waterhole, plenty of mud, ideal for solitary cryptids seeking long-term hibernation. No loud parties, serious inquiries only. As we've journeyed through these stories tonight, the idea of the Bunyip as misunderstood has been a constant companion. Perhaps its fearsome reputation was largely a projection, a reflection of human fears and unfamiliarity with a new and strange land. Maybe its roars were just the natural sounds of the bush, amplified by nervous imaginations. Maybe its attacks were the unfortunate consequences of disturbing a creature that simply wanted to be left alone. If the Bunyip has faded from common, literal belief, perhaps it's because it has finally achieved its ultimate goal: to be left in peace, to sink back into the quiet mud and the deep stories undisturbed. It's a rather comforting thought in its own way. The monster wasn't vanquished, it just retired. It put up a "do not disturb until the next millennium" sign and settled in for a good, long sleep. The sky is noticeably lighter now. The sharp edges of the trees are becoming distinct against the horizon. The first tentative chirps of daytime birds are cutting through the lingering chorus of the night. Your time by this billabong, this portal to stories and speculation, is drawing to a close. You look at the water one last time. It's just water. Or is it? The surface is calm, betraying no secrets. But beneath that surface, in the collective memory, in the folklore, in the quiet, unvisited corners of the vast Australian continent, the Bunyip still lurks. Not necessarily as a physical beast, but as an idea, a question mark, a reminder of the mysteries that lie just beyond the edge of our knowing. It's a symbol of the wild, the untamed, the parts of our world, and perhaps even ourselves, that resist easy explanation, that prefer the shadows, that need their quiet spaces to simply be. And maybe, just maybe, it's still there, having a long, slow, sleepy stretch in the cool mud, utterly oblivious to the fact that you've spent hours pondering its existence, content in its ancient, watery solitude. It doesn't need your belief or anyone else's. It just needs its billabong, its peace, and perhaps a few less kookaburras laughing quite so loudly at the crack of dawn. Relaxation outro. And so, as the tail of the Bunyip gently fades, like ripples smoothing out upon the surface of a still, quiet pool, allow your own thoughts to soften and drift. Feel the comfortable weight of your blankets, a safe haven far from any murky billabongs or rustling reeds. The journey tonight was one of imagination, a gentle wandering through stories and whispers from a land of ancient dreams. There are no monsters here with you, only the soothing darkness, the gentle hum of the night, and the steady rhythm of your own quiet breath. Let any lingering images from our story become soft and hazy, like mist rising from the water at dawn. The shadows are just shadows. The sounds are just the familiar murmurs of your own peaceful surroundings. Every muscle in your body can now release. letting go of any tension, sinking deeper and deeper into a state of profound, quiet rest. The billabong is far away, its mysteries sleeping soundly just as you are now invited to sleep, deeply and peacefully. There is nothing to disturb you, nothing to trouble your mind. Only calm, only quiet, only the gentle embrace of approaching slumber. Drifting now so easily, so comfortably, into a soft, quiet, peaceful sleep. Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back through the mists of time, not to a spooky billabong this time, but to the bustling, sometimes surprisingly noisy heart of an ancient empire. We're venturing into the candlelit bedrooms, the cubicula of ancient Rome, to explore a quest as old as humanity itself, the desperate search for a good night's sleep. Picture yourself not tossing and turning under your modern duvet, but lying on a firm Roman mattress, perhaps stuffed with straw, or, if you're lucky, wool or feathers. The sounds of the city, even late at night, a distant clatter of cartwheels on stone, the murmur of voices from a nearby insula or apartment block, maybe even a neighbor's particularly vocal argument, filter through your unglazed window shutter. Your modern pharmacopoeia of sleep aids is millennia away. You've got what Roman ingenuity and folk wisdom could offer, and frankly, considering some of their other medical ideas, like using electric eels to cure headaches, you'd probably be a little wary. Surviving a Roman doctor's attempt to cure your insomnia might have been more challenging than the sleeplessness itself. So, before you get too comfortable, nestled in your 21st century cocoon, take a quick moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps these little historical meanderings reach more ears. And as always, I'd love to see where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Pop it in the comments below. It makes the night feel a little more connected. Now turn down the lights, maybe get that fan going for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a Roman cubiculum. It's small, probably quite plain unless you're seriously wealthy. A bed, a small table, perhaps a chest for your toga and tunic. A single flickering oil lamp casts dancing shadows on the plastered walls, maybe painted with a simple design if you're middle class, or elaborate frescoes if you're lounging in a villa. The air is cooler now, the heat of the Italian day having mostly dissipated, but it might carry the lingering scent of wood smoke from cooking fires, or the less romantic aroma of the city's ancient sanitation system, depending on your neighborhood and the direction of the wind. Not exactly the lavender and chamomile potpourri we might associate with bedtime today. Sleep, or somnus as they called its personification, its god, was just as essential and often just as elusive for the Romans as it is for us. They understood its restorative power. The physician Galen, a towering figure in Roman medicine whose theories would dominate Western thought for over 1,000 years, wrote about the importance of sleep for maintaining the balance of the body's humors. That classic quartet of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Get those out of whack according to Galen, and everything from your mood to your digestion, and yes, your sleep, would suffer. This is a foundational historical fact. Roman medical understanding, heavily influenced by Greek thinkers like Hippocrates and later Galen, saw sleep as intrinsically linked to overall physical and mental health, governed by these internal balances. So, if you couldn't sleep, a Roman doctor would likely first consider what humor was out of balance, or what external factors were disrupting your natural state. But beyond the somewhat clinical views of physicians, everyday Romans had their own array of beliefs and practices when it came to coaxing Morpheus, the god of dreams, often a companion of Somnus, to pay a visit. And this is where things get wonderfully peculiar. Let's talk about lettuce. Yes, humble garden lettuce. Lactica sativa. Pliny the Elder, that indefatigable Roman encyclopedist who seemed to write about everything from astronomy to zoology to, well, the best way to cure a headache. He had many suggestions, some less alarming than electric eels, noted that lettuce was believed to induce sleep. He even claimed that the Emperor Augustus was once cured of a serious illness by his physician Musa, who prescribed lettuce. The reasoning? Lettuce was cool and moist, thought to counteract excessive bile or heat that might cause restlessness. So you might find yourself a sleepless Roman munching on a few lettuce leaves before bed. Not exactly a decadent midnight snack, but if it worked, who were you to argue with the emperor's physician? It's a rather charmingly simple remedy, isn't it? Like being told to eat your greens, but for your brain instead of your biceps. Of course, not all Roman sleep advice was so benign. Historians and classicists still debate the actual prevalence and severity of insomnia in ancient Rome. Our written sources, letters, poems, medical texts, predominantly come from the literate elite. These were men mostly who had the time and education to write about their sleepless nights, their anxieties about politics, finances, or perhaps that epic poem they just couldn't get right. Did the average Roman artisan, farmer, or shopkeeper suffer the same rates of insomnia? Or were they so physically exhausted by their daily labor that sleep came easily regardless of lumpy straw mattresses or noisy neighbors? It's difficult to say. The stressors were different. No blue light from scrolls, that's for sure, but perhaps worries about whether the grain shipment would arrive, or if their children would survive the latest fever sweeping the city kept them staring at their stucco ceilings. It's a classic challenge in history, trying to reconstruct the everyday experiences of those who didn't leave behind detailed personal accounts. You shift on your Roman bed, trying to find a comfortable position. The straw rustles beneath you. Perhaps you've already tried the lettuce. What next? Well, the Romans were great believers in the power of herbs, and their materia medica was rich with plant-based remedies. Poppies, for instance, were well known. The milky sap of the opium poppy, Papaver somniferum, the very name means sleep-bearing poppy, was a potent sedative. Roman physicians knew of its power, and while it wasn't available like our modern, highly refined opioids, extracts and preparations containing opium were certainly used to relieve pain and induce sleep. Galen himself described various concoctions using opium. It was effective, no doubt, but also dangerous if misused then as now. The image of a Roman quietly sipping a poppy-laced draught to find oblivion is a potent one. A reminder that the search for escape from wakefulness or pain is a long and often perilous human endeavor. Then there were gentler herbs. Chamomile, with its delicate white and yellow flowers, was likely used, as it has been for centuries across many cultures, for its calming properties, perhaps brewed into a kind of tea or infusion. Valerian root, another plant still found in herbal sleep remedies today, has a long history of use as a sedative, and it's plausible the Romans knew of its virtues, given their extensive knowledge of European flora. Lavender, too, with its soothing scent, might have been employed. Perhaps bunches of it hung in the cubiculum or pillows stuffed with it, much like we use lavender essential oil for relaxation today. It's rather comforting to think that some of these gentle, natural remedies have stood the test of millennia. A Roman nodding off to the scent of lavender isn't so different from us using a lavender-scented pillow spray. Maybe they'd even have a Roman version of a white noise machine, a gently trickling water feature in the courtyard, or perhaps a particularly dedicated slave tasked with making soothing shh sounds all night. Marcus, more shushing, please, and a little less clicking with your tongue this time. Diet played a significant role in Roman thinking about health and, by extension, sleep. A heavy meal late in the evening, especially one rich in meats and strong sauces like garum, that infamous fermented fish sauce the Romans put on everything, was generally understood to be a recipe for a restless night. Indigestion, or crapula, as they might call the discomfort from overindulgence, was no friend to sleep. So, a physician might advise a light evening meal. However, some foods were specifically recommended for sleep. Beyond lettuce, things like almonds and even milk, perhaps warmed and sweetened with honey, might have been consumed. Milk from an ass was considered particularly beneficial for various ailments, so perhaps a cup of warm donkey milk was the Roman equivalent of our sleepy time tea. It sounds a bit odd to our ears, but a specific weird detail from some ancient medical texts is the belief that the properties of the animal could be transferred through its milk. So, if donkeys were seen as placid or perhaps even a bit dim-witted, no offense to donkeys, their milk might be thought to impart a similar calming, mind-numbing quality. "Drink this, my dear," a Roman wife might say to her restless husband. "It's from Buttercup, the most wonderfully boring donkey in all of Campania. You'll be asleep in no time. But what if herbs and diet failed you? The Romans, for all their engineering prowess and legal sophistication, were also deeply superstitious, and magic was often an accepted part of daily life, intertwined with medicine. If you were truly desperate for sleep, you might turn to amulets, charms, or incantations. This is where the lines between medicine, religion, and magic become wonderfully blurry. You might wear an amulet inscribed with certain symbols or words, perhaps something invoking Somnus or other sleep-associated deities. Or you might have a magic square, those grids of letters that can be read in multiple directions, etched onto a lead tablet and placed under your pillow. The idea was that these magical devices could ward off evil spirits or negative influences that might be disturbing your rest. Historians and archaeologists still debate the precise meanings of some of these magical symbols and incantations found on amulets and curse tablets, which were also a thing, but hopefully not used for putting someone else to sleep permanently. Were they seen as directly compelling the gods, or more as a kind of spiritual protection? Or was the very act of performing the ritual or wearing the charm a powerful psychological comfort, a placebo effect on a grand scale? The answer is likely a bit of all three. The human mind is a powerful thing, and if you truly believe that a small carved piece of bone with a nonsense word on it will help you sleep, it just might. You toss again, the oil lamp sputtering, casting long, unsettling shadows that almost look like, well, best not to think about that. The city outside is quieter now, but not silent. A dog barks in the distance. The watchman calls out the hour. And you're still awake. Perhaps it's time to consider the more physical approaches. A warm bath before bed was a Roman institution. The grand public baths, the thermae, were typically visited earlier in the day for socializing and exercise as much as hygiene. But a private bath in your villa, or even a simple washing with warmed water before bed, could be deeply relaxing. The Romans understood the soothing power of warm water to ease tired muscles and calm the mind, much as we do today. Massage, too, was a common practice, often available at the baths or performed by household slaves. A gentle massage with scented oils could certainly help to release tension and prepare the body for sleep. Imagine a Roman, weary from a day in the forum or on the training grounds, submitting to the skilled hands of a masseur, feeling the knots in their shoulders dissolve, the cares of the day slowly ebbing away. That's a sleep remedy that sounds pretty good even by modern standards. No electric eels involved, just good old-fashioned muscle relaxation. However, not all Roman bedrooms were peaceful sanctuaries. For many Romans, especially those living in crowded insulae in the heart of the city, noise was a significant problem. The satirist Juvenal famously complained about the incessant noise of Rome, from the hammering of craftsmen during the day to the rumbling of supply wagons at night, which were often restricted to nighttime hours to ease daytime congestion, ironically creating a different kind of nocturnal disturbance. He lamented that only the very rich could afford a quiet night's sleep in Rome. Sleep? In Rome, you must be joking, he essentially wrote. So, for many, achieving sleep might have involved simply becoming inured to a constant level of background noise, or perhaps finding ways to block it out. Heavy shutters, thick curtains if they could afford them, or maybe even stuffing something in their ears, a precursor to modern earplugs. It's a reminder that some sleep struggles are timeless and universal, like noisy neighbors or a loud street. I bet there were Romans who fantasized about inventing a mute button for particularly loud chariot drivers. One must also consider the influence of dreams themselves on Roman sleep. Dreams were taken very seriously. They weren't just random neural firings, they were often seen as divine messages, omens, or warnings. There were professional dream interpreters like Artemidorus in the 2nd century AD, who wrote extensive treatises on how to understand the symbolic language of dreams. So, if you had a particularly vivid or disturbing dream, it might not only wake you up but also cause considerable anxiety about its meaning, making it harder to fall back asleep. Did that dream about the talking goat mean I'm going to get a promotion? Or that my prize-winning goat is about to demand a pay raise? Such anxieties could easily lead to a restless night. It's a bit of a catch-22. You need to sleep to dream, but then the dream itself might ruin your sleep. The Roman gods, it seems, had a peculiar sense of humor when it came to their nocturnal messaging service. So, as you lie there in your Roman bed, having perhaps tried lettuce, a sip of poppy laced wine, let's hope not too much, and maybe even muttered a half remembered incantation to a rather obscure household god of silence, you are part of a long, weary tradition. The quest for restful slumber is a thread that connects us across the centuries, a shared human vulnerability. The remedies may change, from donkey milk and magical amulets to melatonin gummies and white noise apps, but the yearning for that sweet oblivion, that nightly reset, remains exactly the same. And somewhere in the quietest part of the night, Somnus still watches, perhaps with a knowing, sleepy smile. You're still there in that Roman cubiculum, the night unfolding around you like a dark, heavy scroll. Perhaps the lettuce didn't work. The warm donkey milk, if you could afford such a luxury or even stomach the thought, proved unpalatable, and the poppy draft felt a little too much like dicing with Dispater, the god of the underworld. What options remain when the simple remedies fail? This is where you might consider consulting someone with more specialized knowledge, a medicus or physician if your purse strings allowed, or perhaps a local wise woman or root cutter whose knowledge was more steeped in folk tradition. The world of Roman medicine was a fascinating blend of empirical observation, sophisticated Greek theory, thank you again, Hippocrates and Galen, and a healthy dose of what we might charitably call, it seemed like a good idea at the time. A formal physician, particularly one influenced by Galen, would likely approach your insomnia with a diagnostic eye. They'd consider your diet, your daily habits, your temperament. Are you too choleric? Too melancholic? And try to restore your humoral balance. This is a key historical point. Galenic medicine was highly systematized. If you were deemed to have an excess of hot and dry humors, for example, leading to agitated wakefulness, the remedies would aim to cool and moisten you. This could involve prescribing those cooling foods like lettuce or cucumber, but also more complex herbal preparations. They might concoct a potion involving extracts of water lily, purslane, or even willow bark. A source of salicylates related to aspirin, known for its anti-inflammatory and mild pain-relieving properties, which could indirectly aid sleep if discomfort was an issue. Now, some of these physician-prescribed concoctions could get quite elaborate and occasionally a little startling to our modern sensibilities. While Galen himself was generally quite rational in his plant-based remedies, the broader medical marketplace included practitioners whose recipes could be, shall we say, more adventurous. This brings us to a wonderfully weird detail: the occasional inclusion of truly bizarre ingredients in ancient remedies, not always for sleep, but for general health, which could certainly have been adapted. Imagine being handed a potion by a slightly wild-eyed medicus who assures you that the secret ingredient for a peaceful night is a tiny pinch of powdered stag beetle or perhaps the liver of a black cat, only if it was ethically sourced from a cat that died of natural boredom, of course. While these are more extreme examples, the Roman pharmacopoeia, as described by writers like Pliny the Elder, did include a vast array of animal products, minerals, and unusual plant parts, some of which undoubtedly found their way into sleep remedies offered by less mainstream healers. You might politely decline the stag beetle brew and ask if they just had any more of that nice chamomile. Oh, that simple peasant stuff? The medicus might scoff. Where's the fun or the billable hours in that? This highlights an ongoing debate among historians of medicine. To what extent did the sophisticated, theory-driven medicine of elite physicians like Galen actually permeate the everyday healthcare practices of the broader Roman population, especially the plebeian class or those living in rural areas? Did most ordinary people consult these learned doctors, who often catered to the wealthy? Or did they primarily rely on traditional folk remedies, local healers, and the accumulated wisdom passed down through families? The answer is likely a mixture. Access and affordability were certainly factors. A consultation with a renowned physician and a prescription for an exotic herbal compound could be expensive. For many, a poultice made from common garden herbs by a village elder, or a simple incantation learned from their grandmother, was probably the first and often only line of defense against a restless night. There was likely a vibrant and complex medical ecosystem, with official medicine and folk traditions existing side by side, sometimes overlapping, sometimes in gentle opposition. Let's turn our attention from what you might ingest to where you're trying to ingest it. Your bedroom, the cubiculum. We've touched on the noise, but what about other environmental factors? Roman architecture had its own ways of dealing with light and air. Windows were often small and unglazed, covered with wooden shutters, ferriculae, or sometimes translucent panes made from thinly split mica or selenite if you were well off. Heavy curtains, vela, made of cloth or even animal hides could further block out light and drafts. So you could achieve a reasonably dark room. However, air quality could be an issue. In winter, Romans used portable braziers burning charcoal for warmth. While providing welcome heat, these could also fill a poorly ventilated room with smoke and carbon monoxide, which ironically might make you very sleepy, but not in a healthy way. It's a rather stark historical fact that indoor air pollution was a significant, if unrecognized, health hazard in the ancient world. You might be trying to drift off only to find yourself in a coughing fit, wondering if the cure for your insomnia is actually worse than the sleeplessness itself. Perhaps the ideal Roman bedroom had excellent cross ventilation and a slave specifically tasked with fanning away any stray brazier smoke and gently wafting in the scent of lavender. A little more waft, Demetrius, and try not to look so resentful about it. My humors are at stake. Bedding itself was also a factor. As mentioned, mattresses could be stuffed with straw, wool, or feathers for the wealthy. While feathers sound luxurious, imagine a poorly cured feather pillow on a hot Roman night. It could get a bit fragrant. Bed frames were typically wooden, sometimes with bronze ornamentation. Some Roman beds even had a raised headboard, but they didn't have the sophisticated sprung mattresses or memory foam we enjoy today. You were essentially sleeping on a compacted mass of organic material. Finding that cool side of the pillow might involve a significant amount of rustling and replumping. And if your straw mattress had attracted any tiny, uninvited guests, fleas, bedbugs, well, good luck getting any sleep at all. That's a kind of Roman nightlife no one signed up for. Let's revisit those potions and poultices. How were they actually made and used? Roman herbal preparations were quite sophisticated for their time. They understood infusion, steeping herbs in hot water like tea, decoction, boiling tougher plant materials like roots or bark to extract their properties, and maceration, soaking herbs in oil or wine to create infused oils or medicinal wines. So, your sleep remedy might be a warm herbal drink or a few drops of a concentrated herbal wine, or perhaps an oil infused with calming herbs like chamomile or hops. Yes, hops, besides being used for beer, also have sedative qualities and were known in the Roman world to be massaged onto your temples or chest. Poultices were also common. Crushed herbs, sometimes mixed with clay or flour to form a paste, applied externally to the body. You might find yourself lying there with a fragrant, slightly damp compress of herbs on your forehead, hoping it would draw out the fiery spirits keeping you awake. It sounds rather messy, but the ritual itself, the gentle application, the soothing scent, could all contribute to a sense of calm. This brings us to another fascinating academic discussion: the power of ritual and belief in ancient medicine. When a Roman physician or healer prepared a remedy, especially if it involved specific steps, perhaps spoken charms or ingredients that were rare or had symbolic significance, how much of its perceived effectiveness was due to the actual pharmacological properties of the ingredients, and how much was due to the profound psychological impact of the ritual itself, the placebo effect. If you went through a complex process to obtain or prepare a sleep remedy, and if you deeply believed in its power or in the authority of the person who gave it to you, your mind might be predisposed to experience relief. This isn't to dismiss ancient remedies as just placebo, but to acknowledge that the context, the belief, and the ritualistic performance were integral parts of the healing process and likely played a significant role in their success, especially for something as subjective and mind-dependent as sleep. Imagine a healer slowly grinding herbs in a special mortar, chanting softly, then carefully wrapping the preparation in clean linen. The whole performance would inspire confidence and a sense of being cared for, which are themselves conducive to relaxation. Beyond the physical, what about the mental game? Did the Romans have techniques for calming a racing mind? While they wouldn't have used terms like mindfulness or meditation in the way we do, various philosophical schools offered guidance on achieving inner tranquility or ataraxia, which would certainly be helpful for sleep. Stoicism, for example, with its emphasis on accepting what you cannot change and focusing on your virtuous response to external events, could provide a framework for dealing with anxieties that might keep one awake. A dedicated Stoic, tossing and turning, might try to rationally analyze their worries, dismiss them as indifference, things outside their control, and calmly return their focus to their breathing. Easier said than done, of course, especially when your neighbor is loudly practicing his rhetoric speech for tomorrow's court case. The ingratitude of the masses, he bellows, is a burden I bear for Rome. And I bear you. The Stoic might mutter into his pillow, but I will remain serene. Mostly, Epicureanism, another prominent philosophy, advocated for seeking modest, sustainable pleasures and freedom from pain and fear as the path to happiness. This would naturally include the pursuit of restful sleep. An Epicurean approach might involve creating a pleasant and tranquil evening routine, enjoying simple comforts, engaging in calming conversation, and avoiding distressing news or thoughts before bed. Essentially, ancient sleep hygiene. They understood that a troubled mind was the enemy of sleep. Perhaps they'd read a soothing poem, Ovid maybe, but perhaps not his more scandalous works before bed. Listen to some gentle music from a lyre, or simply contemplate the beauty of a well-tended garden if they were fortunate enough to have one. It's a more holistic approach, recognizing the deep connection between daytime peace and nighttime rest. And then there's wine, vinum, an intrinsic part of Roman life, from daily meals to religious festivals. It was commonly drunk diluted with water, often significantly so. Wine was certainly recognized for its sedative effects, and a cup of well-diluted wine in the evening could have been a common way to unwind and encourage drowsiness. Some wines might even have been specifically medicated for sleep by infusing them with herbs known for their calming properties, a sort of ancient nightcap. Pliny mentions wines made with mandrake or henbane, both powerful and potentially dangerous psychoactive plants, which would undoubtedly induce sleep, or something much deeper if the dosage wasn't carefully controlled. This is a historical fact. The Romans were adept at creating these medicinal wines, though the line between a gentle sedative and a potent narcotic could be perilously thin. You'd want to trust your wine merchant or your physician implicitly. Just a small cup, Lucius, your spouse might advise. Remember what happened last time you had the extra sleepy vintage from dodgy Tiberius down by the docks? You serenaded the household gods with sea shanties until dawn. Naturally, the kind of sleep remedies available, and indeed the quality of sleep itself, would have differed enormously based on social status. A wealthy patrician reclining in a spacious villa in the cool hills outside Rome, with slaves to fan them, prepare calming herbal baths, and ensure absolute quiet, had a very different set of resources than a poor plebeian family crammed into a single room in a rickety, noisy insula in the Subura district. For the urban poor, sleep might have been a precious commodity, snatched amidst the noise, the smells, the lack of privacy, and the constant anxieties of poverty. Their remedies would have been simpler, cheaper, relying on common local weeds, passed down superstitions, or perhaps just the blessed relief of utter exhaustion after a long day of manual labor. They likely didn't have access to imported lettuce specifically grown for the emperor's table or expensive poppy extracts. Perhaps their remedy was simply the resilience of the human body and the ability to find oblivion even in the harshest conditions. It's a sobering thought, a reminder of the vast inequalities that underpinned Roman society, extending even to the fundamental human need for rest. The perfumed, quiet cubiculum of the elite versus the cacophonous, shared space of the poor. Two different worlds, two different struggles for sleep under the same Roman moon. The night in your Roman cubiculum wears on, and perhaps, despite the lettuce, the herbal drafts, the warm bath, and your best stoic efforts to dismiss the neighbor's operatic snoring, as an external indifferent, sleep remains stubbornly elusive. Your mind, instead of quieting, might be racing through the day's events, or tomorrow's anxieties, like a runaway chariot in the Circus Maximus. When the usual remedies offered by physicians or folk wisdom failed, where could a truly desperate Roman turn? For some, especially those with means or a particularly persistent affliction, this might involve seeking help from the gods in a more direct and immersive way. This brings us to the practice of incubation or temple sleep, a significant historical fact concerning ancient healing practices. While most famously associated with the Greek god of medicine, Asclepius, whom the Romans adopted as Aesculapius, seeking healing dreams by sleeping in sacred precincts was a known recourse. Imagine, if you will, making a journey to a sanctuary of Aesculapius, perhaps one nestled in a quiet grove or by a sacred spring. After performing prescribed rituals of purification, fasting perhaps, or specific sacrifices, you would be permitted to sleep within the temple grounds, often in a special dormitory called an abaton. The hope was that the god himself would visit you in your dreams, either providing a direct cure or offering diagnostic advice that the temple priest could then interpret. For someone plagued by chronic insomnia, the chance of a divine intervention, a sacred dream that could unravel the cause of their restlessness, or simply grant them a night of profound healing sleep, would have been a powerful draw. It's a fascinating blend of faith, psychology, and perhaps even the simple therapeutic benefit of a change of scenery and a structured, hopeful ritual. The votive offerings left at these healing sanctuaries provide some wonderfully weird and poignant details about the hopes and ailments of ancient peoples. While we don't have vast numbers of offerings specifically labeled for insomnia, people would leave terracotta models of afflicted body parts, an arm, a leg, an eye. It's not too much of a stretch to imagine someone leaving, say, a small clay model of a head, or perhaps even just a pair of ears, hoping that Aesculapius would whisper the secret of restful slumber into them. Or maybe they'd leave a small, roughly carved bed, a symbolic plea for peace in their own. Archaeologists find these offerings little tokens of human suffering and hope, and they paint a vivid picture of people seeking relief from all manner of afflictions. Naturally, scholars still debate the mechanisms behind the reported successes of temple sleep. Was it truly divine intervention? Or was it the power of suggestion, the strong belief in the god's ability to heal? Perhaps the enforced quiet of the sanctuary, the altered diet during purification rituals, or even specific environmental factors within the sacred site played a role. Some temples were known for their peaceful settings, fresh air, and pure spring water. Maybe the priests were skilled at interpreting dreams in a way that provided psychological comfort or practical lifestyle advice. It was likely a potent combination of all these factors, a holistic approach that addressed the mind, body, and spirit, which could for some prove more effective than a simple herbal potion consumed in a noisy city apartment. It's like an ancient wellness retreat, but with a much higher chance of a god showing up in your REM cycle. Did you see the god? One hopeful patient might ask another in the morning. No, the other might reply, but I did get 8 uninterrupted hours for the first time in months, so I'm calling it a win. And the complimentary sacred spring water was surprisingly refreshing. Beyond specific healing deities like Aesculapius, Romans had a whole pantheon of gods and spirits who held sway over the night and its mysteries. We've mentioned Somnus, the personification of sleep itself, often depicted as a gentle youth, sometimes winged, perhaps carrying poppies. His son, Morpheus, was the principal shaper of dreams, crafting the human forms that populated nightly visions. Offerings and prayers to these deities were common. A simple Roman might pour out a little wine to Somnus before bed, or murmur a quiet plea for peaceful, dreamless sleep. But the night also had its more unsettling denizens. Romans believed in lemures or larvae, the restless and often malevolent spirits of the dead, who could wander the night and disturb the living, potentially causing nightmares or that unsettling feeling of a presence in the room that keeps you wide awake, listening to every creak of the floorboards. There were specific rituals like the Lemuria festival in May, designed to appease these spirits and keep them from troubling households. So, if you were having a particularly bad run of sleepless, nightmare-filled nights, you might suspect some unhappy ancestral spirit was to blame and undertake the appropriate appeasement rituals, perhaps a bit more effective than just telling Uncle Festus's ghost to pipe down. How did the Romans view chronic insomnia if it wasn't attributed to grumpy ghosts or humoral imbalance? The surviving literature, particularly letters and poetry from the elite, certainly suggests that prolonged sleeplessness was a recognized and often miserable condition. Pliny the Younger, for instance, wrote with concern about friends who suffered from debilitating illnesses that included severe insomnia. The despair and frustration of lying awake night after night, unable to find rest, is a timeless human experience, and we see echoes of it in Roman writings. Was it considered a specific disease in itself? A divine punishment? A symptom of a guilty conscience, or simply a stroke of terrible luck? Probably a mixture depending on the individual's beliefs and the prevailing views of their social circle. A particularly stern moralist might suggest that a sleepless man was troubled by his own misdeeds, while a physician would look for physical causes, and a more superstitious individual might blame a poorly performed ritual or a curse from an enemy. There wasn't a single unified Roman theory of chronic insomnia, but rather a spectrum of potential explanations and, consequently, a wide range of attempted solutions, from the medical to the magical to the religious. You take a slow, deep breath, imagining the pre-dawn chill seeping into your Roman cubiculum. The oil lamp is burning very low now, threatening to plunge you into complete darkness. Perhaps after all this mental wandering through remedies and rituals, a certain weariness is finally setting in. The very act of considering all these ancient attempts to find rest can be, in itself, a little soporific. The Romans, for all their practicality and ambition, were still subject to the same biological need for sleep as we are. They just had a different toolkit to address its absence. It makes you wonder what a Roman insomniac, magically transported to the 21st century, would make of our modern approaches. They'd probably be astounded by our understanding of brain chemistry, our sleep clinics with their polysomnography tests, our pharmacopoeia of precisely engineered medications. You have small, sweet-tasting tablets that can reliably induce slumber without involving poppy sap or the intestines of a dormouse, they might ask, eyes wide with wonder. And these noise-canceling headphones that can silence my neighbor's perpetually yapping dog? Sorcery. But tell me more about this melatonin. Is it mined from moonbeams? But even with all our modern advancements, the core struggle remains. We still toss and turn, worry about work or family, and sometimes find our minds racing at 3 a.m. Perhaps one of the lessons from looking back at these ancient Roman remedies is a sense of shared humanity in this nightly quest. They, too, understood the value of a quiet environment, the soothing properties of certain herbs, the comfort of ritual, and the importance of a calm mind. They knew that a heavy meal or too much wine before bed was unwise. They recognized that anxieties and worries were the enemies of sleep. While their specific methods might seem quaint or even bizarre to us, the underlying principles often resonate with our own contemporary understanding of sleep hygiene. They were, in their own way, fumbling towards the same truths we still explore. That sleep is precious, often fragile, and deeply connected to our overall well-being. As the very first, almost imperceptible lightening of the true dawn begins to filter through any cracks in your shutters, you might feel a sense of acceptance. Perhaps tonight wasn't a night for deep, unbroken slumber. Perhaps it was a night for quiet reflection, for a journey through time. And that, in itself, can have its own kind of peace. The city outside will soon begin to stir with the sounds of a new day. The bakers firing up their ovens, the first vendors making their way to the market, the distant call of a bugle from a military barracks. The Roman world is waking up. And maybe, just maybe, as the demands of the coming day begin to make themselves felt, your body, your mind, will finally yield to the gentle call of somnus, granting you an hour or two of rest before you must rise and face your own Roman day, armed with the knowledge that even emperors once ate lettuce for a better night's sleep. And so, as our journey through the candlelit nights of ancient Rome comes to a gentle close, allow the images of bustling forums and quiet cubicula to soften and dissolve, like a dream upon waking. Feel the solid comfort of your own bed beneath you, the familiar weight of your own blankets, a sanctuary of peace in your own time. The worries and remedies of those ancient sleepers are far removed, fading into the soft mists of history. There is only the quiet of your present moment, the gentle rhythm of your breathing in and out, slow and deep. Let each breath carry you further away from any lingering thoughts, further into a state of calm and tranquility. Imagine the last flickering flame of that Roman oil lamp extinguishing, leaving behind a profound and welcoming darkness, a darkness filled with the promise of deep, restorative rest. Every muscle in your body can now release completely, sinking down, down into the wonderful softness, the comforting support beneath you. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to think about, except allow yourself this precious gift of sleep, drifting now, peacefully, effortlessly, into the quiet, welcoming embrace of a deep and restful slumber. Good night.